You're done with vanilla or cookie cutter web designs and the loud sell AI websites fast noise, right? You believe in the quest that Massimo Vignelli left us of fighting against the ugliness of this world, but you feel stuck and not sure how to push yourself and your design skills. Well, my friend, today I'm going to share with you my top 11 tips for layout and composition in web design so you can finally level up your websites one pixel at a time. Let's go. Hello, my friend. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Adrian Somoza, former lead designer at MediaMonks, and I focus on helping freelance web designers grow their business to be financially peaceful and creatively challenging. So if you want to create cleaner, more intentional websites, make sure to grab the free Golden Canon Grid, which also includes a free course with 5 secrets to compose beautiful websites. Over 10,000 designers have already taken it and are using it. Link is gonna be below. Now let's dive in. So tip number 1 is start with the business in mind. Design is solving problems. So first, you need to have a clear picture of what problems you're solving. Before you jump into Figma, you have to understand the business strategy. It all starts with business strategy. So you gotta ask yourself before jumping into Figma, before pushing pixels, ask yourself, what's the primary goal of this website? And what's the secondary and tertiary goal of the website as well? And start prioritizing goals for this website and giving them the hierarchy they need. So the main CTA should help users perform the primary goal of the website and then categorize CTAs by the hierarchy of the business goals. So secondary CTAs for secondary business goals, primary CTA for primary business goals. And let your clients' business and goals dictate what modules, CTAs, pages, and even copy go in there and what story are you going to tell. So let me share my website because I know it inside out and I know the business goals that I have, and so that's why I designed it this way. So for me, right, the main goal of my website, because I'm a consultant and I have a BONT club, which is for freelance web designers, my main CTA is apply to join the club, right? That's the main CTA. It's my primary goal to have people land on my website, prompt them to apply to join my consulting program. Now, secondary CTA is to learn for free, right? For people who are not ready to take that step. The secondary CTA is going to be learned for free. So you can see how that business strategy dictates the CTAs I have in my website and really everything I created. So for example, I talk about bridging the gap and I show my clients' work, right? And I show myself in my office and I talk about the main goals of my consulting program. And the main CTA is joining the BONT Club, and you can see when you hover over it, right? This idea of showing people inside the community and myself, right? Because people who land into my website know me, right? And so I show myself, I show my students, and it conveys better the idea of joining a club, right? A place where there's like-minded web designers from all over the world. So this layout idea comes from the business goal of applying to join the BONT Club. And then as you scroll, you will see that I have a main CTA, which again is applied to join the BONT Club. And it's a sticky CTA that follows you through the website. And you can also see testimonials, or again, the learn for free CTA is secondary, okay? So you can see there how I stacked the hierarchy of the CTAs, and the main content, right, is basically tailored towards my business goals as a website owner. Okay, so tip number 2 is give meaning to your decisions. Design is thinking made visual. So once the business goals and pains are clear for you, the thinking part, it's time to start making meaningful decisions on the visual side. This is the difference between a junior and an art director. Juniors just pick a color that's trendy or that they like. Art directors think, why this typeface? Why this color? Does it make sense conceptually? If you want to get to an art director level, you need to start with the why and let that inform every decision that you make on the visual side. Beauty without meaning is just cosmetic, okay? So let me show you one example of this. So this website that you can see here, long story short, this was done at Media.Monks, and by the time this project lands on my lap, they had tried several attempts at creating an art direction that the client liked, and it wasn't being successful. So what I did was I digged into the existing brand, right? The oscilloscope logo. And I started, for example, one thing that was not there on the previous versions of the art direction was the yellow color, which when you see this website, you may think, well, that's an obvious choice. Well, but if you're not really thinking about why this color, why this font choice, right? Then you're just picking colors because you like them or you like how they look, but not because they have a meaning. So I chose a yellow because I literally picked the yellow color that oscilloscope logo had, and of course the client liked it. It was an easy win, and the prior iterations of the art directions didn't land well for the client because it wasn't following their branding. So that was a very easy thing to fix. And then another thing that I picked was a typeface, and I started layering the visual decisions based on the project itself. So you can see that this was done for oscilloscope, which is basically a studio content that creates music clips, some movies and stuff like that, like a studio content. And so I basically grabbed, and this is a very retro studio content. And so I grabbed those two ideas, right? And I started layering visual elements that hinted to that retro vibe, right? With a Kodak analog elements to it. So if we go inside here, there's an animation that kind of mimics the focus of a camera. There's like little visual elements in the menu that kind of hint to that camera visual metaphor. And there's also like this camera visual cues in the titles and stuff like that, right? So very simple yet powerful visual decisions that tie meaning to the visuals, right? And give it some meaning. Otherwise, it would be just random visual ideas that wouldn't necessarily have nothing to do with the website or the client that I'm designing for. So that's tip number 2. So tip number 3 is turn data into information. As designers, our job is not just to throw data at users, but rather to digest the data for them and turn it into information. So there's a big difference between data and information. Data is raw and undigested. It lacks cadence and it lacks narrative. Digesting the data and turning it into information will help you hook users' attention throughout the page to keep them interested and wanting more. This will help you increase, CVR, increase the ATP or average time on page, and reduce the bounce rate in their website. So for example, for this website here, right, this subpage, which is the history subpage of the website, I got a Word document. It was basically a plain text, right, full of data, right? It just raw data that I had to read through and understand and then make something out of it. And so what I did is I basically read the information and I separated all of that text into basically a timeline, right, of how high school, college, and how the progression of the career of this businessman called John Elway developed. And then I started to highlight little stats here and there that they were all compiled all together, right? I started to highlight them in the respective moments of the history of John. I did little badges, I did different hierarchies for stats with each one and a small text underneath, right? And started to highlight little things here and there that hook the user's attention and keep them engaged. Because most users don't really read through all of this text, right? But if they can see like little highlights here and there, they might be interested in reading more about it, right? Like if you see this little text here, that hooks you and makes you maybe want to read more about it. So that keeps the attention of the users. It allows them to really digest the content easier and maybe stay more time in the website. Now, just to give you another example, right? This is a great website, don't get me wrong. I love a lot of things about it. The visuals are great, but when you start scrolling through it, right, and you get into the website, this about section is really long, right? And even though you have like an audio here that you can hear, and there's like 2 type styles and this 3D logo, it's still quite a lot of text to go through without any visual aid to it, right? So this is something I would avoid doing, and I would try to make the best I can to just include little nuggets that users can scan very easily and that they hook the user into the content and make them want to read more. Okay, tip number 4 is don't let the grid control you. So I see this a lot. Most amateur designers just turn on the grid and start placing elements based on it. My ideal workflow is to compose with the grid turned off, and then once I like how it's looking, then turn it on to adjust a few things to it rather than the other way around. So for example, in this website, right, I kind of grabbed this part of the layout and I just fixed it for the navigation. As you can see, if you scroll, right, everything spans from here to here. So for that, I had to create a grid that spanned from here to here, and this is a fixed module. So this has no grid to it. Okay, so that's one thing, for example, that you can do. I'm just dictating where the grid lives, what part of the website is occupied by the grid, and then for the grid itself, right, you can see that even though there's a grid, right, and there's elements that repeat their alignments, which we're going to talk about more later, you can see that yes, the edge repeats, but then I'm very loosely using it to just put in there whatever I feel best for that part of the website. So, you know, sometimes I might just fix things like the CTA and this typeface as a title, and then have this part scroll and the rest be fixed. Sometimes I might just scroll everything. Sometimes I might just use, you know, the title here and a secondary title here. So I'm not really letting the grid dictate where I should place elements, but rather using the grid as a tool and controlling it without letting the grid control me. And remember, the Golden Canon Grid course is waiting, free, concise, and battle tested by 10,000 plus designers. Link is going to be below. Tip number 5, control the visual journey. Make one thing the visual hook, then a second and a third element. More than 3 distinct hierarchies usually is too much and starts to create confusion and add too much cognitive load. Bear in mind that users already need to read a lot of text, probably from the website, so just simplify the layout into 3 clear hierarchies. For example, this is a website done by Obis. If you don't know them, they are awesome. And here you can see how there's a clear logo. The title is very clear, H1. And then there's a secondary element, which is the image, and a tertiary element, which is the text here. And then there's just miscellaneous here and there, but they are not the main thing to look at, okay? So 1, 2, 3. Here we have, again, 1, 2, and 3, right? If we keep scrolling, we have 1, 2, and 3, right? The color. Here again, right? 1, 2, 3. You get the idea. Tip number 6. repeat more than you change. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Let's look at iPhone's 17 Pro website, okay? So here is the background, right? If you take a look at the background, it's just this off black. Then they have some things in full black, like this video. And then they have one typeface, right, that they use all throughout, except for the logo, okay? But all over the website, you will see the same typeface, which is San Francisco Pro, their own typeface, right? Which is, by the way, a new version of the Helvetica, right? So that they don't have to pay for the royalties. But anyways, one background color, one typeface, very few hierarchies, even though I think the typographic system could be simplified even more. And then there's two colors for the text, the white, full white, and then there's this mid-gray that kind of is a mixture, like a mid-ground between black and white, right? So three main colors for the text, and you can see those play out throughout the website. So sometimes it's just better to make few decisions and repeat them so that you have a holistic approach to typography, a holistic approach to colors, and very clear rules that has like 1,000 benefits. I talk more about that in this video, by the way, where I talk about 8 rules of minimalism in web design. So if you want to go more in depth into, how to synthesize your visual decisions, make sure to check that one out. All right. Tip number 7, unblock the whole canvas. Don't corner yourself with a tight grid. Avoid awkward white spaces that are unused. So let me show you what I mean. I love Ben Mingo's work, by the way. Check him out. He's Ben Mingo on Dribble. And you can see how, for example, in this design, even though it's not a website, but in this design, he has things that go with a margin and span the whole canvas. Even though this layout is minimalistic, and I'm not saying that you need to fill the canvas with elements, right? I'm showing you this on purpose to show you that you don't need to fill the canvas with elements to control or unblock the whole canvas. What I'm saying is that there's little elements that span throughout the whole web, like the whole canvas, right? You see how he's using the whole canvas and just using a margin and spanning things to the edges. And you will see how that applies all around his designs, even though there's like very big white spaces in between the elements, but he's using the whole canvas. So when we have these big white columns on left and right, they just feel like we're not really in control and the grid is controlling this, right? And especially when there's like very typical layouts like title, paragraph, image, right? It just feels like the website is dictating where and how big each element is, rather than just using the grid to your advantage. One thing that I wanted, like a pro tip, we don't need to make elements in the composition match two edges of the grid. So for example, left and right. We can match the left part of things. So for example, this CTA, instead of giving it a size based on the grid, which would have been letting the grid control the layout, what I did is I basically decided that this 120 pixel for this module, I was going to use the same size for the size of the CTA. That's it. And so I just created that rule based on this one. And then this secondary element here, that is the footer, has half of that, 60. So I'm creating like a modular spacing system or size system where it's like 60, 120, right? And things are coinciding with each other, but they don't have to coincide all with a grid, if that makes sense. So tip number 8 is don't marry to your first iteration. Forget perfectionism here, okay? When you start, you're never gonna get it perfect on the first try. You need to iterate, right? Everyone does. I have to iterate too to get to an advanced type of layout, and a layout that I think looks great, right? Even though, you know, there's always room for improvement, and that's another thing. Like, you will never get it 100% perfect. There will always be something that you feel like, oh, I could have done this, or I could have improved this. Okay, so the idea is not to just focus on perfectionism, but rather iterate, explore, and push your boundaries one pixel at a time. Let me show you how I did it for this particular website. Here is the exploration process, right? You can see how I started with this design, right? And I started trying things out and iterating, copy pasting and changing the layouts, trying new colors, trying new arrangements, and I landed on this last or final result. So this is the final result, but look at all the iterations I went through to get there, right? So this has to be a testimony that, you know, you have to iterate. You cannot marry with the first iteration, okay? Tip number 9, pick a few layout rails. So before designing, draw 2 or 3 layout rails that run from top to bottom. And these global edges let you keep a holistic view by snapping headlines, images, and CTAs to that same global edges, so sections relate to each other or modules relate to each other, instead of feeling like you're solving each module at a time, right, and independently. So again, let me show you a website that I love that has this in practice. So take this edge here, okay? They marked this edge, and if we start scrolling, you see how it repeats. This little text, this big text. If we keep scrolling, you can see that here the images stick to those edges. So throughout this whole landing page, there are elements that keep repeating that alignment, and that creates that cohesive look throughout the whole website. Pros have a holistic view of the website. Juniors get stuck on the little details, and they lose the bigger picture. So marking a few layout rails will help you keep that holistic view in mind as you keep adding elements or modules to your website. Tip number 10, use templates as your floor, not your roof. You should start with templates as a baseline of what you want, but build from there. You might do a first iteration with a simple and typical left and right layout, but don't just stop there, okay? Push the limits, try new arrangements, place elements on borders. When I first tried to clearly break away from the typical left text and like text on the left and image on the right, it felt really awkward and uncomfortable. Let me tell you that. It's never comfortable to push your boundaries and try new things. So here's a mindset shift. Become comfortable being uncomfortable. That's the only way that you can grow, one pixel at a time. Tip number 11, hook the user in the hero. The hero section is the first thing that a visitor sees, and like a first date, it has only seconds to make a good impression before they may bounce. It's like the cover of the book, okay? You shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but let me tell you a secret. People do. And they also judge your website by the cover of your website, which is the hero. So make it hooking, make it visually powerful and crystal clear. A hero should answer clearly, what is this website about and why should I care? For example, in this website, there's a clear visual hook, right? There's a powerful text, Bicle. There's a clear action photo. And there's the start of a story here that kind of hooks the reader to want to read more. And so, and it's also a cut-off text. So you want to scroll to finish reading, right? And you have this nice parallax effect. Right? So everything is designed to hook you and start scrolling. Same thing goes for the iPhone website. When you land on the hero of the iPhone 17 Pro, you see this big 3D image of the iPhone with a big text, right? That hooks your attention, and then there's a clear CTA, buy, and there's a clear price here, right? So it's very clear this is to buy the iPhone 17. There's a clear next step for me, and there's even a little clarification here so I can understand what I'm gonna pay for it. Okay, tip number 12, be intentional. This, I think, is the number one law of composition. And if you go back and rewatch this tutorial, you will see that everything I mentioned, this law applies, okay? Here's the law, right? You gotta be either subtle or you gotta be bold, but don't be mild. Go big or go home. It's not about contrast, it's about intentionality, okay? So yes, it's important that you go really bold when you're trying to make a contrast, right? So for example here, right, this text, it's not just a little bigger than the main text. No, it's huge. This is probably like 500 pixels big, and it spans almost the full width of the canvas. So when you do a contrasting decision like this, you gotta be really, really bold. Here, between this little text and this H2, let's say, there's again a very clear difference in size. It's not just a few pixels bigger, it's 2, 3, 5 times bigger, okay? Be very clear and bold with each visual change by creating very powerful contrasts. Now, the other side of the coin reads, be very subtle. And so, for example, here in this website, you can see how when they are contrasting the color of the background and the typography, it's a very subtle contrast. It's not black, right? Because black is full contrast with that background. But it's also not, mid-gray. It's a very subtle contrast between the background and the text. So there's a clear intention to it. The designer wanted to make a soft contrast. And it's very clear that that was the intention. There's no room for ambiguity. Now, this also applies to many things, like for example, between this character and the sans serif Helvetica, there's a clear contrast as well. This is very flat, it's one color, and this is a 3D, very chunky text. Then we have a contrast between a handwritten typography and a very clean sans serif one, even though I don't love this typeface. And there's also a monospace typeface here, which contrasts really well with the sans serif one. So monospace and sans serif go well together, right? So you can see the typeface being used for the navigation, and then for the rest of the text, you can see there's mainly a sans serif, and then we also have a handwritten typeface. And then we have the 3D version of it. So all of them are contrasting either very subtly or very, very boldly. Now, see how throughout the website, for example, on this case, they are repeating the typefaces. They are not just introducing, new colors, new typefaces all the time, changing between modules, the way they use typefaces. No, there's a lot of repetition to it, and that creates that holistic approach to a website that separates really pro websites from junior ones, right? Junior websites are websites where each module feels a little bit different, right? Because there's no holistic view of the whole website. So you're not here for templates or tricks. You're here to design with intention and get paid fairly for it, right? So if you want a different grid to compose more innovative websites, then make sure to get the Golden Canon Grid free course and learn 5 secrets to compose beautiful layouts with it. Link is below. That's it for today. I hope you found it valuable and it helps you push the boundaries of your layouts. And as always, my friend, let's bridge the gap 1 pixel at a time.